Welcome to the news for the week of 6 September 2020. Security Weekly was sold to CRA. Argentina and Newcastle ransomware. Cisco Jabber. The NSA wants to educate you. All this and Jason Wood will talk about creepy geofences on this edition of Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Do you know where your organization's crown jewel data is, whose data it is, what it contains, and if it's flagged, tagged, and classified accurately? Defense in Depth requires Discovery in Depth. At Big ID, they help organizations uncover dark data, classify sensitive and regulated data, meet compliance requirements, and take action for data on-prem, in the cloud, and everywhere in between. Learn more about how Discovery in Depth can change the way enterprise organizations find, classify, and protect sensitive data at securityweekly.com/Big ID.
All right, so a big story to lead off. Cyber Risk Alliance announced this morning that they had acquired Security Weekly. And Paul announced this last Thursday on the show, so there was sort of the secret surprise announcement on Paul's Security Weekly Thursday night. But the official announcement has now been posted in the Village Square. So CEO and founder Doug Manoni said that Security Weekly expands CRA's domain expertise and a suite of mobile-optimized delivery formats to better serve our audiences and marketing partners. And CRA owns InfoSec World, among other things that they have. Paul himself said, "We set out to help educate the security community every day and have fun delivering a wide variety of information security topics. Joining CRA and their portfolio of respected brands will help us accelerate our audience growth and introduce innovative new product platforms." Doug White commented, "Could someone please hand me another drink? And I think the cigar cabinet is mostly empty." Gartner predicted the financial impacts of cyber attacks resulting in fatal casualties will reach more than $50 billion by 2023. So it's probably time to update the old cyber policy with that in mind. He was basically talking about all the recent attacks on petroleum plants, power plants. There was a blast furnace attack in Germany. All of these things tended to lead to a large amount of damage to the facilities, but as of yet, they had not incurred any obvious loss of life. But as the attacks on the infrastructure grow more intense and infrastructure further starts to penetrate all levels of the industry and our lives and everything else, that probably really will change. The story goes on to claim that Gartner is also predicting that CEOs will soon be liable for these human fatalities and collateral damage. Well, I don't know about that, but I think the point is that much like CEOs occasionally taking the hit for an environmental catastrophe, that what's going to happen is underwriters and lawyers are going to have a field day going after companies that choose to ignore basic cybersecurity hygiene, and that eventually is going to result in a large-scale loss, and then large-scale damages are going to be applied because it really gets harder and harder to say, oh, we had no idea that was dangerous. That's been a long tried-and-true mechanism for that. How long have we been saying this? A long time. So, that may well be what that article is really coming around to. Argentina, the 28th largest economy in the world, got their borders closed, not for a long period of time. I think it was like 4 or 5 hours. They had to close both incoming and exiting people from the borders of Argentina. They were hit with NetWalker ransomware, which shut down the infrastructure that involved all their Windows servers and such. So they had to air gap because it started to spread, and so they shut everything down. All right, so this thing included the comprehensive migration capture system, which I translated, or somebody translated, because I was having trouble saying it, the real name of it. But after about 4 hours, they were able to get some services back online. The attackers demanded $4 million as a ransom in Bitcoin. And originally they asked for $2 million, and the government said, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And basically after 7 days, the ransom went to $4 million, and a counter started saying that pretty shortly we're going to start releasing your decrypted or your secret data onto the internet. So the data that was decrypted was provided as a proof of life on the main screen for NetWalker, and then the countdown. There was a screenshot in the article of the countdown sitting on some number of days, like 4 days, and then they were going to start releasing more, which is certainly the standard in these modern ransomware frameworks. At the same time, Newcastle University was infected with doppelpaymer, which is another ransomware, and they had to take the whole university offline on the 30th of August. And so the DoppelLeak site, which is the sort of doppelpaymer background site, basically had already leaked 750 kilobytes of stolen data on their official leak site, and Doppelpaymer gang claimed responsibility for the attack. Multiple services at the university are still offline, and this just further illustrates that this modern approach to ransomware of mailing you a piece of the victim at a time until you agree to pay up. And I have been calling this the Bunny Lebowski gambit. So if you don't remember that, it's time to rewatch The Big Lebowski and check that out. WhatsApp disclosed 6 new flaws in their app via a dedicated security advisory site. So this is a change for them. And they also put out a promise for more transparency and updating their apps and letting people know about security flaws in WhatsApp. That has about 2 million or so users currently. Some of the initial release bugs on the site were from the Facebook bug bounty program that had been put in place. But in the past, WhatsApp had pretty much had a lack of reporting and a response to known issues, and they had a lack of disclosure, acknowledgement, or anything else when people told them that there were threats and or 0 days in their app. They just kind of ignored the whole thing until they got caught, which, that sound familiar? Well, you know who owns them, of course. Criticism of WhatsApp last year stemmed from not disclosing a 0 day, even though it was already being used to install spyware on people's phones remotely. Facebook behaving badly, so say it isn't so. I did put a link to the new disclosure site in the wiki, so you can check out that if you're a WhatsApp user and keep up with what's going on, assuming they put stuff up there. An RCE and Cisco Jabber for Windows has been disclosed. It's CVE 2020-3495. Did put a link to that on the wiki. This thing can be used to send a custom-crafted message to the target and was discovered by Watchcom. The vulnerability is another one of these XMPP message vulnerabilities where they can embed instructions inside these messages that are basically allowed onto the platform and then can execute, and the actual Jabber app doesn't take any further actions to discern a good message from a bad message. So basically they can push in unvalidated contents onto the system. There were a lot of caveats in this article about it was sometimes required that the person be on the same domain. There were all kinds of different restrictions, but this was a bug released by Cisco, rated 9.9. Cisco Jabber, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a collaboration system which supports various forms of media, kind of like Discord and some of these other platforms. So this was Cisco's sort of, getting off into that field. The vulnerability currently only affects Windows systems that are using the full functionality of Jabber. It does have like a voice-only feature or something like that was not affected. I did see this story, and I wanted to mention it to you. I think all of us in this industry are often so paranoid that we don't really think about this kind of thing, but our employees and family members and so forth, not so much. The idea of scraping social media, I put this article up because you may want to pass it along to your employees or to your friends and family members. The idea of scraping social media, either manually or via scripts, is nothing new. And the idea of OSINT has been around as long as there was a window to look into the cave. But I do think we should focus a bit with our users and try to ensure that they really understand that beating phishing and beating credential stuffing isn't just about not clicking a link, that there's a lot more to it than that. And that when you publish your life on social media, that your life can be used then to build a file on you and collect information. It's not paranoia if they really are out to get you. I mean, basically people put everything about themselves up there, and the ability to snoop on individuals and associate them with companies, especially in new remote workforce type scenarios, is really, really high. phishing, credential stuffing, password spraying, basically all encompass the majority of attacks that are successful right now. So remember to do a little bit of training on OSINT and on social media and all the cross-contamination of social media, not even just the flaws built into it, but just the fact that when you put something out there, it can actually, leak over into the public space, or public stuff can leak over into your corporate space if they're running Facebook on your corporate machines. The NSA and the NCMF, which is the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation, released design plans for a proposed cyber center for education and innovation, which would provide 70,000 square feet of classroom and conference space in order to encourage knowledge sharing in cybersecurity between academics, government, and industry. The center will also house the National Cryptologic Museum, and so finally Jeff Mann will be able to get all those old boxes out of his basement and put them on display somewhere. And with that, we will take a short break. When we come back, Jason Wood will join us. Stick around.
The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Well, he's just back from doing a mankini shoot in the Falkland Islands. One of America's top male models, Jason Wood, joins us to talk about creepy geofencing and crime scenes. So, hi, Jason. Welcome back.
Hey, Doug. Thank you for that creepy introduction.
I love creepy introductions. What else am I going to do?
Oh, my goodness. Hopefully the pictures of that mankini photo shoot never leak out.
We're working on getting those, so.
Appreciate that.
Breaking news.
Speaking of creepy things, I got an article here from Wired that caught my attention this week, titled "Creepy Geofence Finds Anyone Who Went Near a Crime Scene." And if you've listened to Security Weekly news for a while, you know that I am always interested in collisions between technology and the legal world. Now, Doug has already mentioned one today with the loss of life due to potential operational security control systems and things like that. In fact, I was planning on doing that story because I found this really cool image of a city with looks like the sun exploding right over the top of it in Threat Post. But he beat me to it, and then I found this one, and I was like, okay, this one's actually pretty good too. And it talks about the usage of what are termed geofence warrants. And I decided, okay, let's take a look. What is a geofence warrant? Now, as it turns out, this is a warrant filed with technology companies, much like any other information request to identify somebody who own an IP address or whatnot. But in this case, it's a little more broad than you might think would be allowed. At least I was a little, maybe not totally surprised, but a little bit taken aback that this was being done. The idea here is that the warrant requests any information about devices that were in a particular location at a given time. So, for example, if a crime was committed at 9:45 p.m. Friday at the corner of Main Street and Mulberry, law enforcement could get a judge to issue a warrant if they allow it and send it over to Google or Apple or whoever to request, hey, what devices were in this area at that time? And, basically using geofencing technology. Now, that sounds a little freaky right away. There is some anonymization being done, as it turns out, as I was reading what was being described in this article by Wired. They still do have to get a warrant, but that's not terribly hard to meet, particularly when you have something like, let's say, a murder that occurred or something like that. But they get the warrant, and then they go to the technology company, Google, let's say, and they request the data, which comes back in a somewhat anonymized form. So law enforcement does some analysis on it to find the devices that they think they're interested in, narrow it down a little bit from there to then request, all right, who actually owned device A, B, or C here. And then they can follow up and continue on with their investigation. Now, there are some things here that are concerning to me about this and to others as you read the article. Historically, warrants, they've been well established for hundreds of years, but they're typically aimed at a person of interest. We have a suspect for some kind of crime or something like that. And so we get a judge to review the probable cause and stuff like that, make sure law enforcement isn't getting too grabby for data or for search that they want to perform, and then they enable them to go in and perform the search once they receive it. But in this case, we start out with a suspect typically, but in this case, we don't have a suspect. We just have a crime and a time and a location. And in this case, the court order is being issued to somebody like Google, Apple, Facebook, to give us all of the electronic data you have around this period of time. And then we'll go through it and see if we can find our suspect or suspects in that. So, one example that they give as an issue with this, the Wired article gives, is the idea that somebody was murdered at one point and the law enforcement is doing their investigation. They do a geofence warrant, and they know that this person's phone is at the crime scene. So they arrest him, and he spends 6 days in jail. The problem was, as it turns out, he actually wasn't at the crime scene. He had lent the phone to, I assume, a friend who then went out and killed somebody. And his phone was signed into his Google app, and so he was basically being blamed for it for 6 days until they figured out, his alibi was, they don't say, but his alibi was too good or whatever it is, or other information implicated somebody else. They figured it out, but not until he spent 6 days in jail. So, oops on that one. Definitely not where I would want to be dealing with if I lent a phone out to a friend. The Fourth Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, and this is obviously limited to the U.S., I don't know what's going on in other countries, was written to put some limits on what the government could do about gathering information about individuals. There was a lot of suspicion towards government and stuff like that due to the American Revolution, rebelling against Great Britain, all that stuff. But obviously something written 200 years ago isn't going to give us a great deal of information here to deal with things like geofencing, which, would not even be in their worst nightmares. So it's up to sitting judges now to make determinations on whether the procedures being used by law enforcement meet or are pushing the limits of the Fourth Amendment protections. And what these limits are and what they mean is obviously being contested pretty regularly here and being pushed. In this case, Wired article cites 2 judges who denied requests for geofencing warrants for law enforcement. Basically said they were way too broad. One example was in Chicago, where hundreds of people would be passing by in a pretty close area. And I think this is a good thing. The judges should be pushing back on this sort of thing. They should be making sure law enforcement's doing their due diligence and not just going the easy mode and gathering up tons of information and seeing what they can shake out. So I am definitely uncomfortable with gathering up a list of suspects from some pseudo de-anonymized or anonymized list of devices. At the same time, I recognize that law enforcement has a job to do. It's important, and they know this data is out there. They're trying, and it can make a huge difference in their investigation. Unfortunately, though, that's why the Fourth Amendment was created, was to curtail abuses that could occur when the government decides that they just want to go after things en masse, or because they don't like that person or what have you. I think the Wired article is worth a read, and I have the link for it in the show notes. You should take it out. I'd like to add a little bit of a caveat to it. One of the things I noticed is that the sources used to write this article were only critics for the practice. So there's no information from the opposing view on how it's used, whether the procedures, safeguards, what they're trying to do, that sort of thing. I still would fall more on the idea of being concerned about this, but I'm also aware that this presented just one point of view for this discussion. I think it would be great if law enforcement would comment on this and give us some of their point of view on how they do this. It's important for us to be aware of these issues and to understand what's being used out there by law enforcement and debate until we find at least a mostly acceptable set of ground rules to operate underneath. If this all sounds interesting to you, take a look at the show notes and start doing your research from there about the issues that it describes.
Cool. Thank you, Jason. You got the better story. That was a lot better than that CEO story. I mean, yours actually had some basis, and I mean, the other one was just sort of people speculating about something. So this was a better one. I should have taken it.
Yeah, but they had people getting killed and
theoretical people.
technology.
This has got like real world, like exciting, like people down on who went down to the crossroads at midnight kind of thing going on.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very William Gibson kind of stuff that in the light of like how you're monitoring everybody. But as soon as Bill Gates gets your 5G chip implanted, you'll be all set and we can monitor.
I thought that was Elon Musk.
Well, yeah. Well, I thought it was supposed to be Bill Gates. I think Elon's just designing the chips. Bill's the one implanting them in the...
My bad. All right, got it.
Could be. I don't know, but now both of them got like jet packs or something and they're flying around. Who knows what they're up to? So, I don't know. All right. And finally, this last story was just a thought experiment that I thought you might be interested in that was in Gizmodo. The question they asked was, what would happen if a 0-day or some other vulnerability makes it possible to see literally everything online? So it's just a thought experiment, so I'm not saying that this exists, but they're saying, what if something happened and there really was just some kind of like universal skeleton key backdoor? And they asked some different experts to sit down and talk about what would happen if everyone could get to everyone's social media, search histories, everything. So all secrets are revealed. So this is kind of in line with Jason's story in the same way, but it's now instead of law enforcement, this means everybody can just go in and type, happy days on the command line, and boom, everything is revealed about anybody you want. So you don't like your neighbor, you go see what they've been up to. Read the story for their views. My opportunity, I would once again mention to you, if you're interested in such thing, Arthur C. Clarke and Stephen Baxter wrote a novel that you've definitely heard me mention before. And Arthur C. Clarke didn't actually write the novel. He wrote the idea of it, and Stephen Baxter actually wrote the novel. But this whole thing was about allowing wormholes to let everyone basically see around the curvature of the universe so they could look at any point in time and see what was going on. But the whole point of the novel is not the science, which was just speculative, but the idea was about that privacy had ceased essentially to exist, that no one had any privacy. There was no further assumption of privacy. And that's sort of where a lot of the people answering that thought question got to. And it's a very interesting thing to think about in the context of social media and the way that we give up our privacy all the time. So is there anything in your search history you don't want anybody to see? I mean, mine is completely pristine, clear. It's just about, charities saving puppies, and there's never anything else but it's worth taking a look at if you're into such things. And that's the news for now in the time of plague. I'm Doug White. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Security Weekly News. And this week is episode 666 of Paul's Security Weekly. I'll be back Friday with the Security Weekly News wrap-up. And, if you think 666 is a conspiracy, just add up all the numbers on a roulette wheel and see what you get. Bye.